I stood there scrubbing burnt food from expensive china plates, my designer manicured nails now hidden beneath yellow rubber gloves, while the sound of champagne glasses clinking and elegant laughter drifted down from the grand ballroom above. To everyone around me, I was just another hired hand, invisible and insignificant. What they didn't know was that my husband had just closed a $2 billion acquisition deal last month. This entire estate belonged to us. And tonight, these people would learn that treating others poorly always comes with a price they can't afford to pay. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. My name is Victoria, and 6 months ago I married the most incredible man I've ever known. His name is Alexander, and while most people recognize him as the tech mogul who revolutionized artificial intelligence and owns 3 of the fastest-growing companies in Silicon Valley, to me he's simply the guy who still opens car doors and remembers exactly how I like my morning coffee. We met in the most unexpected place, volunteering at a homeless shelter on Christmas Eve. I was ladling soup into bowls when this tall, quietly confident man appeared beside me, rolling up his sleeves without fanfare. He worked alongside me for 4 hours, never mentioning his wealth or status, just genuinely caring about helping people who had nowhere else to go. When he finally introduced himself, he simply said he was Alex and asked if I'd like to grab coffee sometime. I had no idea I was talking to someone whose face regularly appeared on magazine covers. That's the thing about Alexander that made me fall in love with him. Despite building a business empire worth billions, he never lost sight of what really matters. He tips waitresses generously, learns the names of everyone who works in our building, and has never once made anyone feel small because of their job or background. Maybe that's why our relationship works so perfectly. We both believe that a person's character matters more than their bank account. Even after our wedding, which was a small, intimate ceremony with just close family and friends, I chose to keep working at the community center where I'd been a social worker for 3 years. While Alexander attended board meetings and flew around the country for business deals, I was perfectly content, helping teenagers from difficult backgrounds get their lives on track. I loved the work, loved feeling like I was making a real difference, and Alexander supported my choice completely. Our life together was beautifully normal despite the extraordinary circumstances. We cooked dinner together when he was in town, watched movies on the couch like any other couple, and rarely talked about money or business. The massive estate we called home felt comfortable rather than ostentatious, mainly because Alexander had specifically chosen a property that offered privacy and security without feeling like a museum. But tonight was different. Tonight was the annual winter charity auction, an event Alexander had been organizing for months to raise money for youth education programs across the country. The guest list included some of the wealthiest and most influential people in the state: tech executives, real estate moguls, entertainment industry leaders, and old money families whose names appeared on hospital wings and university buildings. The irony wasn't lost on me that hundreds of powerful people would be gathering in our home, drinking our wine and enjoying our hospitality, while most of them had absolutely no idea who I was. Alexander always kept his personal life extremely private, and I preferred it that way. I had attended exactly 2 public events with him in our entire relationship, and both times I felt completely out of place among people who seemed to view wealth as a competition. That's when inspiration struck. Call it curiosity, call it a social experiment, but I found myself wondering how these supposedly refined, educated people would behave when they thought no one important was watching. How would they treat someone they perceived as beneath their social status? Would their charitable donations and public philanthropy match their private behavior towards service workers? The more I thought about it, the more intrigued I became. These people claimed to care about helping disadvantaged communities, yet I'd witnessed enough charity events to know that many of them barely acknowledged the staff serving their food. I decided I wanted to see their true colors, to understand whether their compassion was genuine or just another accessory they wore to look good in public. So I made a decision that would change everything. I would attend the auction, but not as Alexander's wife sitting at the head table. I would experience the evening as one of the catering staff, invisible and unnoticed, able to observe how these influential people really behaved when they thought their actions had no consequences. I know it sounds crazy, and maybe it was, but think about how rare it is to get an authentic glimpse into people's character. Most of the time, everyone is on their best behavior around us because they know who Alexander is. They smile, they're polite, they treat me with respect. But is it genuine, or is it just because they want something from my husband? Alexander was scheduled to fly back from a crucial business meeting in Tokyo just an hour before the event started, which gave me the perfect window to execute my plan. I borrowed a simple black uniform from Maria, our head housekeeper, who looked confused but didn't ask questions when I explained I needed it for a surprise. I practiced walking differently, speaking more softly, and perfected the art of being forgettable. The transformation was remarkable. I pulled my hair back into a tight ponytail, applied minimal makeup to wash out my features, and added a pair of plain glasses I'd ordered online. The uniform fit perfectly, and when I looked in the mirror, I saw exactly what I was hoping for. Someone completely ordinary, someone who would blend seamlessly into the background. I slipped into the kitchen through the service entrance just as the catering team was making final preparations. The head caterer, a stressed-looking woman named Janet, barely glanced at me when I introduced myself as a last-minute addition to the serving staff. She handed me a tray and a brief rundown of my duties, too busy managing the evening's logistics to question my sudden appearance. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. As the first guests began arriving, I positioned myself near the entrance with a tray of champagne flutes, watching these powerful people make their grand entrances. The ballroom looked absolutely spectacular. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light over polished marble floors, hundreds of white roses adorned every surface, and a full orchestra played softly in the corner. It was elegant and sophisticated, exactly the kind of atmosphere that made people feel important and generous. But as I began moving through the crowd, offering drinks and canapés, I started noticing things that made my stomach turn. The way certain guests would take glasses from my tray without making eye contact, as if I were some kind of automated dispensing machine. The way they would continue their conversations right over me, discussing business deals and vacation plans as if I didn't exist. One particularly striking woman in an emerald green gown took 3 champagne glasses from my tray, handed 2 to her companions, and drained the third without acknowledging my presence even slightly. When I politely said, "You're welcome," she looked startled, as if she'd forgotten I was a human being capable of speech. But the real education began when I encountered Vivienne Hartwell, the self-appointed queen of the city's social scene. She was a tall, imperious woman in her late 40s, dripping in diamonds and wearing a dress that probably cost more than most people's annual salary. Vivienne had this way of looking at people that made you feel like an insect under a magnifying glass, and unfortunately, she decided to focus that attention on me. "You there?" she called, pointing a perfectly manicured finger in my direction. Her voice had the kind of authority that expected immediate compliance. "What's your name? And why are you moving so slowly? This is a high-caliber event, not some community center potluck." I straightened my shoulders and replied politely, "Victoria, ma'am. I apologize if I seemed slow. I was trying to make sure everyone had what they needed." Vivienne's eyes narrowed as she looked me up and down, clearly finding me lacking in some indefinable way. "Well, Victoria, let me explain something about working events of this caliber. Speed and invisibility are your only jobs. These guests don't want to chat with the help. They don't want to hear your life story, and they certainly don't want you lingering around their conversations." I nodded respectfully, biting back the dozen responses that sprang to mind. This was exactly what I'd hoped to observe. The real Vivienne Hartwell, not the charitable philanthropist who smiled for photographers at fundraising events. For the next hour, Vivienne made it her personal mission to critique everything I did. The way I held my tray was wrong. The way I approached tables was too direct. The way I offered drinks was too familiar. According to her, I was a complete disaster as a server, and she made sure everyone around could hear her assessments of my performance. Other guests seemed to take their cue from Vivienne's behavior. If she could treat the staff poorly, then apparently it was socially acceptable for everyone else to follow suit. I watched educated, supposedly cultured people transform into entitled bullies the moment they thought no one important was paying attention. A distinguished gentleman in an expensive tuxedo grabbed an appetizer from my tray and immediately spit it into his napkin. "This salmon is completely overcooked," he announced loudly. "Don't you people understand that timing is everything in food service? I'm not paying premium prices to eat rubber." I wanted to remind him that he wasn't paying for anything. This was a charity event where he was supposed to be donating money to help underprivileged kids get better education. Instead, I apologized sincerely and offered to bring him something else from the kitchen. He waved me away dismissively. Just try to do better. This kind of amateur service reflects poorly on the entire event. As the evening progressed, the treatment became increasingly degrading. Guests would interrupt me mid-sentence when I was trying to serve them, as if my words weren't worth hearing. They made jokes about the intelligence of service workers, assuming I couldn't understand their humor or wouldn't dare respond. Some even made comments about how people in my position should feel grateful for any work we could get. The breaking point came when disaster struck the kitchen. The main refrigeration unit malfunctioned, leaving dozens of expensive dishes at risk of spoiling. Janet was frantically trying to coordinate emergency solutions while managing the ongoing service, and she desperately needed extra hands to prevent the entire evening from becoming a catastrophe. "Victoria," she called out, her voice tight with stress. "I need you to abandon serving duty and get to the dish pit immediately. We've got mountains of plates backing up, and if we can't keep clean dishes rotating, this whole event is going to fall apart." I stared at her for a moment, processing the request. Here I was, in my own home, being ordered to spend the evening washing dishes while guests enjoyed an event my husband had organized and funded. The irony was almost too perfect. "I was hired to serve guests," I said carefully, "not to work in the kitchen." Janet's expression hardened. "Listen, sweetheart, tonight you'll do whatever needs to be done to keep this event running smoothly. This is the real world, not some fantasy where you get to pick and choose your responsibilities. Now get to that kitchen and start scrubbing, or pack up your things and leave." The ballroom seemed to quiet around us as nearby guests paused their conversations to watch this confrontation unfold. I could feel their eyes on me, some looking amused by the drama, others appearing uncomfortable but unwilling to intervene. No one spoke up to suggest that maybe there was a more respectful way to handle the situation. I took a deep breath and walked toward the kitchen, not because I was intimidated, but because I wanted to see exactly how far this degradation would go. I was curious about the depths of cruelty people could reach when they believed their actions would have no consequences. The kitchen was absolute chaos. Mountains of dirty plates, glasses, and serving dishes were piled everywhere, and the industrial dishwasher was running at maximum capacity, but still couldn't keep up with the demand. The broken refrigeration unit had created a domino effect of problems, forcing the catering staff to constantly wash and reuse dishes to keep the service flowing. I rolled up my sleeves and plunged my hands into the scalding soapy water, feeling the expensive moisturizer Alexander had bought me dissolving under the harsh detergent. Through the service window, I could see the guests laughing, dancing, and celebrating, completely oblivious to the frantic work being done behind the scenes to make their evening perfect. But Vivienne wasn't finished with me yet. She kept making trips back to the kitchen, each time finding new ways to assert her dominance and remind me of my place in her carefully constructed social hierarchy. She criticized my dishwashing technique, complained about water spots on glasses, and made increasingly personal comments about my ability to handle real work. "You know," she said during one of her inspections, leaning against the kitchen counter like she owned the place, "I've been organizing charity events for over 15 years, and I can always spot the ones who don't belong in this business. You have that deer-in-headlights look that screams amateur." I continued scrubbing a particularly stubborn pan, letting her words wash over me like the dirty dishwater. She had no idea she was lecturing the woman who lived in this house, who had personally approved every flower arrangement and menu item, who could have security escort her out with a single phone call. "The problem with girls like you," Vivienne continued, warming up to her favorite topic, "is that you think showing up is enough. You think that just because you can carry a tray, you understand what it takes to maintain standards at this level. But real service requires anticipation, grace, and most importantly, knowing your place." A few other guests had wandered into the kitchen area, drawn by curiosity about the breakdown in service. Among them was Clarissa Montgomery, a real estate heiress who'd had too much champagne and was feeling particularly bold about sharing her opinions. "Oh my goodness," Clarissa laughed, pointing at me with her wine glass. "Look at our little server, demoted to scullery duty. I bet when you woke up this morning you never imagined you'd end the day elbow deep in dirty dishwater." I looked up from the sink, water dripping from my rubber gloves. "Actually, I find all honest work has its own dignity." Clarissa's face twisted into a condescending smirk. "Dignity? Sweetheart, there's nothing dignified about this. This is what happens when people don't have options. This is what people do when they don't have the education, connections, or intelligence to do anything better. Her words hit me like ice water, not because they hurt personally, but because I realized she genuinely believed what she was saying. In her worldview, a person's worth was entirely determined by their job title, their bank balance, and their social connections. Vivienne nodded approvingly at Clarissa's assessment. Exactly right. I've seen hundreds of girls like this come and go over the years. No ambition, no vision, no future beyond whatever temporary work they can find. This is probably the nicest house she'll ever set foot in. I bet she's living paycheck to paycheck, Clarissa continued, emboldened by having an audience. Probably sharing some tiny apartment with 3 roommates, taking the bus to work, shopping at discount stores. People like her are everywhere, completely interchangeable and forgettable. I stood there with my hands in the soapy water, watching these 2 women reveal their true characters. They weren't just being rude. They were expressing a fundamental belief that human beings could be ranked and valued based on their economic circumstances. It was a worldview that allowed them to sleep peacefully at night while treating others with casual cruelty. But then something unexpected happened. Maria, our head housekeeper, appeared in the kitchen doorway. She'd been watching this entire scene unfold, and I could see the confusion and growing anger in her eyes. Maria had worked for Alexander's family for over a decade, long before I came into the picture, and she knew exactly who I was. "Excuse me," Maria said, her voice carefully controlled, "but I think there's been a misunderstanding here." Vivienne turned toward her with an expression of supreme irritation. "There's no misunderstanding. We're simply trying to get this event back on track after your kitchen staff created a disaster. Who are you anyway?" "I'm the head of household staff," Maria replied, her dignity intact despite Vivienne's dismissive tone. "And I know for a fact that the woman you're speaking to doesn't belong in this kitchen." Clarissa laughed mockingly. "Of course she belongs here. Look at her. This is obviously her skill level. Some people are born to serve, and others are born to lead." But before Maria could respond, I heard a familiar voice calling from somewhere in the house. "Victoria? Honey, are you here?" I got back earlier than expected. My heart started racing. Alexander was home. Vivienne and Clarissa exchanged confused glances. They had no idea what was happening, but something in the air had changed. The energy in the kitchen shifted as we all heard footsteps approaching. "Victoria?" Alexander's voice was closer now, filled with concern. "The taxi driver said he saw you come in through the service entrance. What's going on?" I dried my hands slowly on the kitchen towel, savoring these last few moments before their world turned upside down. Vivienne and Clarissa were looking increasingly nervous, though they couldn't quite understand why. "I'm in the kitchen, darling," I called out, my voice carrying clearly through the house. The footsteps quickened, and suddenly Alexander appeared in the doorway. He looked devastatingly handsome in his perfectly tailored tuxedo, but his face showed complete bewilderment as he took in the scene. Me in a catering uniform with dishwater on my hands, surrounded by a crowd of confused guests. "Victoria," he said, his voice filled with concern and confusion. "What are you doing dressed like that? Why are you in the kitchen instead of hosting our guests?" The silence that followed was deafening. I could literally see the moment of realization dawning on face after face. Vivienne's confident expression crumbled into horror. Clarissa's wine glass slipped from her suddenly nerveless fingers, shattering on the marble floor. "Hello, sweetheart," I said, smiling at my husband with genuine warmth. I decided to experience our charity auction from a different perspective tonight. It's been quite educational. Alexander's brilliant mind processed the situation instantly. His expression shifted from confusion to understanding to barely controlled fury as he looked around the kitchen at the guests who had been tormenting his wife. "Let me understand this correctly," he said, his voice dangerously quiet. "You've had my wife scrubbing dishes in our own kitchen while you enjoyed the hospitality of our home?" Vivienne's face had gone completely white. "Your wife? But she's just a server. She's part of the catering staff. There must be some mistake." "No mistake," Alexander said, moving to stand beside me and taking my soapy hands in his. "This is Victoria Chen Montgomery, my wife of 6 months, and the co-owner of this estate. She's also one of the most compassionate, intelligent women you'll ever meet, though I suspect you've missed that opportunity entirely." The kitchen had filled with more guests, drawn by the commotion and sensing that something significant was happening. Word was spreading through the ballroom that there was some kind of dramatic confrontation taking place. Alexander addressed the growing crowd with the same commanding presence he used in boardrooms. "Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like you to meet my wife, Victoria. She chose to observe tonight's charity auction as a member of the service staff to see how our guests would treat people they considered beneath their social status." The crowd parted as Alexander led me through the kitchen and into the ballroom, still holding my hands. I could see recognition dawning on face after face as people realized the woman they had ignored, dismissed, and insulted was the lady of the house. Victoria wanted to understand whether the compassion and generosity you all claim to feel for disadvantaged communities extends to how you treat the people who serve you, Alexander continued, his voice carrying across the now silent ballroom. "Based on what I witnessed in that kitchen, many of you have failed that test spectacularly." Vivienne stumbled forward, her composure completely shattered. "Mr. Montgomery, I had no idea who she was. If I had known, I would never have. I was simply trying to maintain professional standards. This is all a terrible misunderstanding." "Exactly," I said, finding my voice and addressing the room full of powerful people who were now hanging on my every word. "You treated me poorly because you thought I was just a server. But here's the thing, Vivienne. I was just a server tonight. The only difference between me and the woman who would have been washing those dishes in my place is that I had the privilege of choice." Alexander squeezed my hand supportively. "The woman who was supposed to be doing that job deserves the same respect you would give to Victoria now that you know who she is. Every person deserves that respect, regardless of their job title or bank account." Clarissa tried to slip away through the crowd, but Alexander's voice stopped her cold. "Clarissa, I believe you had some interesting theories about people who work in service positions. Something about them lacking education and intelligence." The shame and terror on Clarissa's face was almost painful to witness, but I wasn't done yet. This moment was about more than personal vindication. It was about using privilege and platform to create real change. "For the record," I continued, "I have a master's degree in social work from Stanford, and I choose to work with at-risk teenagers because I believe every young person deserves a chance to succeed, regardless of their background. The kids I work with often come from families where parents work multiple service jobs to make ends meet. How can we claim to want to help these children while simultaneously looking down on their families?" The ripple effect through the room was immediate and visible. Guests who had been rude to me throughout the evening began to panic, realizing that their behavior might have real consequences. Some tried to approach with stammered apologies, but the damage had been done. Alexander wasn't finished either. "The business partnerships, charity board positions, and social connections that many of you enjoy, those relationships are built on mutual respect and shared values. After tonight, we'll be re-evaluating all of our professional and personal associations." The evening took on a completely different atmosphere after that revelation. Some guests left immediately, too embarrassed and ashamed to remain. Others approached me with what seemed like genuine remorse, sharing their own stories of times when they had been judged unfairly based on appearance or circumstances. A few people even admitted that the experience had forced them to confront their own prejudices and assumptions. One woman told me that watching my treatment had reminded her of her grandmother, who had worked as a hotel maid to support her family and put her children through college. But the most important conversations happened with people who genuinely seemed to understand the deeper message. They weren't just apologizing for their personal behavior. They were committing to examining how they treated service workers in their daily lives. The consequences for the worst offenders were swift and severe. Vivienne's event planning business lost several major clients within a week as word spread through social circles about her behavior. Clarissa's family's real estate company faced boycotts from other businesses who decided they didn't want to be associated with those values. More importantly, the story sparked conversations throughout the community about class, privilege, and basic human dignity. Local newspapers picked up the story, and it resonated with working people who had experienced similar treatment. I received dozens of messages from service industry workers sharing their own stories of being invisible, dismissed, and disrespected by people who considered themselves superior. But I also heard from managers and business owners who committed to training their staff about treating all customers with equal respect, regardless of their apparent social status. The charity auction itself raised more money than ever before, but for different reasons than Alexander had originally intended. People weren't just donating to look generous. They were genuinely motivated to support programs that would help young people from working-class families access better opportunities. As I reflected on that evening, I realized that the most powerful lesson wasn't about karma or comeuppance. It was about the responsibility that comes with privilege and platform. I had the luxury of choosing to experience discrimination temporarily, knowing I could escape it whenever I wanted. Most people in service positions don't have that option. The experience taught me that real change happens when people with power and influence use their positions to challenge injustice rather than simply benefiting from the status quo. It's not enough to write checks to charity if you're simultaneously treating working people as less than human in your daily interactions. This story should remind all of us that we never know the full story of the person serving our coffee, cleaning our offices, or preparing our food. More importantly, it shouldn't matter what their story is. Every person deserves to be treated with basic dignity and respect. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.